Guys, I want to thank you for sitting through this with me and understand this is going to be a mock simulation. But I'm doing this for my class again, and I just want to thank you for coming out. We're here today to talk about a serious matter. We're here to talk about the matter of capital punishment within the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We're here to talk about the fact that they are actually considering abolishing capital punishment and how that affects us and what that means to us. But I need you to understand that on August the 18th, 2016, Congressman Whitfield and Senator Rhodes are going to be hosting a town forum. They want us all to come out because they want to speak to us about this matter. They have their own personal opinions. They have their convictions and what God is leading them to do. But they want to know what the people of the communities in which they represent feel and how we feel on this matter. I'm not going to take up a great deal of your time tonight, but I am going to tell you that what we're talking about is a very serious matter, and the things that I'm going to state tonight are going to be quite graphic. So we've designated an area outside of the room that you can take your children to, or that they can step out to, with some community leaders, pastors within our local church that are going to stand by and watch the children while we talk about this matter, because I don't want to give the graphic nature of this message that I'm about to present in front of them. And usually I wouldn't present a message this graphic, but I need to do this tonight because of the severity of the situation which we are currently faced. Yes, ma'am, I'll take the time for everybody to step out of the room. Go ahead. I'm going to tell you of an incident that I worked, a run that I made in 2008. I responded to a foul odor smell in an apartment complex, housing authority section in the local community in which I served. And when I got out of the vehicle, I immediately recognized the odor of a decaying body. You can ask any first responder in this room that once you've smelled that odor, once you get that inside your brain, it lodges there and you'll never forget it. You'll remember it till the day you die. So I knew immediately this was going to be a bad call because I had that odor that almost knocked me down. I was taken to apartment 45. The door was open for me and I cleared the apartment. And inside a back bedroom, I found a small child, a young girl. She was thrown over a chair that had been flipped over to its side. She had duct tape around her mouth, her face, and her hands were duct taped behind her back. She had been brutally raped, sodomized, and beaten. She had multiple blunt force trauma wounds to her head, and she was left there alone. This young girl's name was Lucy. She was 4 years old. Now you see, Ted was the janitor of this building. Ted had watched Lucy, had stalked her for months, and then he preyed upon her. See, Lucy's mother allowed her to say hi to Ted every morning because he worked in the building in which she lived. And she was just trying to be nice. Ted didn't seem to have a lot of friends. That's what her mom told me. Ted gained Lucy's trust. And during an interview, he told me how he lured her into the apartment by promises of a toy and candy. She must have thought it was okay. She got to say hi to him every morning. He seemed like a nice guy. Gave her a high five as she walked by on her way to school. Ted told me of how once he got her inside the room, he duct taped her mouth rapidly, quickly, so that she couldn't scream. He told me of how he held her down and he duct taped her hands behind her back and threw her over a chair. Ted told me of how this was Lucy's fault, how she had seduced him, and that she got what she had coming. Ted was 47 years old at the time of this interview. Lucy was 4. He then proceeded to tell me how he brutally raped, sodomized, and murdered Lucy. He raped and sodomized her for 3 days. And then when he was finished, he took a 5-pound hammer and he crushed her skull in 3 times. He told me as he walked out of the room, before he shut the door, he looked back and you could see Lucy still kicking. He wondered if he needed to hit her one more time, but then he saw her go limp. She was still breathing. He could hear the blood dripping from her skull to the floor, and he left her there alone, at 4 years old, to die. There are a lot of studies and a lot of numbers that I'm going to tell you today, but at the end of this, there are going to be a few that I want you to remember especially. I want you to understand that monsters like Ted do exist, and the Death and Penalty Information Center released a report in 2005 that tells us that only 3 inmates have been put to death in the Commonwealth of Kentucky since 1976. Another study showed us that an article was based on this study and released from the European Association of Psychology and Law in 2012. Basically tells us that from 1967 to 1976 that there was a moratorium of executions in the United States, and researchers have used this phrase as a practice to further quantify the deterring effect of capital punishment. This study showed that 91% of the states in this nation saw an increase in violent crimes, rapes, murders, assaults, when capital punishment was no longer on the table. It further showed us that in 1976, that when capital punishment was placed back into effect, that there was a 70% decrease, a decrease of 70% of the states across this nation in those same type of crimes. There was another article that I read. It was presented by the Mountain News, and it was titled "The Cost of Life Without Parole." It showed us of a study, a case study, of a double homicide in which 2 31-year-old gentlemen had committed and were convicted, and they were sentenced to life without parole in a state that did not have the death penalty. Assuming these two lived to the age of 65 years old, studies by an analyst of the federal government have shown us that it's going to cost us $1.5 million apiece for that 34-year period from the date that they're incarcerated to the date that they die, if they die at 65 and don't live longer. Because trust me, we take good care of them while they're in there. So it's going to cost us essentially $3 million for those two. $1.5 million to keep a man, an animal like Ted, alive and behind bars, if we do not have capital punishment in this state. Now I want you to think about something. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the family member of Lucy. A 4-year-old girl brutally raped, beaten, and murdered. Think of how if you went to work every day and your hard-earned tax dollars that you were working for were taken from your check to keep an animal like Ted alive, and that you knew that your money, your tax dollar, was keeping the man alive, clothing him, feeding him, caring for him when he was sick, when he had a cough or a sniffle, that he was taken to the doctor, and that your tax dollars were keeping that animal alive. And you knew that you were doing that after this man brutally raped, beat, and murdered your daughter. How would that make you feel, folks? But I don't really want you to think about that, okay? I don't even want you to think about the fact that people are going to try to tell you capital punishment does not deter crime, even though the studies have showed us a 91% increase followed by a 70% decrease in crime, violent crime, murders, rapes, when the death penalty was reenacted. I want you to think about just 4 numbers. I want you to think about 72, 3, 4, and the number 8. 72, that's the number of hours that little Lucy, 4 years old, without a care in the world, was raped and sodomized and beaten until her death. 3, that's the number of times she was violently struck in the head, to be left alone, lying there, gasping for air, dying. 4 years old. And 8. 8's the number of years that Ted's been incarcerated. Ted got off on the death penalty and was actually sentenced to manslaughter in the 2nd degree because of clerical error. And I'm sad to tell you that Ted comes up for parole and release in 3 years. This may not affect you personally right now, but it affects Lucy's dad and Lucy's mother and Lucy's brother. that are in this room with us today. Take the time to stop and ask them how it makes them feel, what it means to them that Ted's going to be walking the streets again. So when you go to cast that vote, when you go to talk to the senator and the congressman on the 18th, I want you to think about those numbers. And I want you to cast a vote that will allow for capital punishment to stay in effect across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Thank you for your time tonight.